Beautiful. Thank you. All right. For today, we will be recording this meeting, and so you will have access to it via our YouTube channel after this meeting. For our agenda, and as you see, please continue introducing yourselves via the chat box. It's always great to know who's here and for others to see who's here around them. But we'll start with just a quick background and primer for folks who are new to PCEF. We'll then jump into and spend the vast majority of our time talking about this current funding opportunity, which we're calling Collaborating for Climate Action. We'll go through and talk about the letters of interest that are part of the application process, talk about some of the guidance. We'll talk about the uses of funds, and then we'll spend hopefully a majority of our time really discussing questions and answering those for folks that are here with us. But, before we get too far in, I want to just go ahead. I'm going to go through the ground rules in a second, and while we're doing that, we're going to shortly after that just turn up a poll for you all. But so just a quick virtual participation checklist. Again, the chat box today will be open during the introduction session, so right around now. But then we're going to close the chat box for a little bit, and you'll only be able to chat the hosts. Part of that is we want to get through the presentation, get through all the content, and we'll answer your questions on the other side. So we'll open up the chat box again once we get to the question and answer session. Once we do get to the question and answer session, we encourage you all to use the raise hand function if you want to ask your question verbally, or if you would like to, you can always just chat in the chat box, and we'll be taking a queue for all the questions and answering those in order. Videos are optional. It's nice to see you all, nice to see folks around us, so those are totally optional. We encourage you all, or ask you all actually, to keep your microphones muted until we get to the Q&A session. Again, this meeting is being recorded, and we do have captioning on this meeting if you'd like to tap into that. All right, with that, before we jump into the first section, start off with the background of PCEF, we just wanted to give a quick little question for folks, a quick poll to get a sense for, how folks are coming into this meeting. So if you all give us a moment, I'm going to see, Rachel, if you can queue up that poll, which will come before you all in just a second.
I'm actually not sure why it was going to let me and isn't now, but I will launch the poll when I figure that out.
I think I might be able to. Let's see.
It may have switched control over to you.
That might have happened. All right, y'all. So the poll's open. We'll leave it open here for about 30 seconds while we start moving into the next session here. All right. I think the poll's open, but we're not seeing people answering it. Maybe this isn't working.
Oh, that's the end poll, the exit. There should be one called welcome.
Let's back up here, y'all. Let's try this again. Let's see. What question brings you here today? Please select the option that best describes you.
I do appreciate the folks who already decided this was a useful use of their hour, though, on the end poll. Thank you.
Are folks seeing the poll? I'm wondering if folks are actually seeing it. Okay. Wendy, are you seeing people populating the poll responses? Okay, I might just not be seeing that. So when we get to like 70%, 75%, let me know and we'll move us along. Okay, beautiful. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll with that. All right, so just a quick background. What is the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund? So as folks know, we're commonly known as Portland Clean Energy Fund, or PCEF, but the full name is Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. That community benefits part is critically important to our mission and our objective and why we exist. We're a fund that generates $200 million a year annually to invest in efforts to address climate change that both advance racial and social justice. We were passed by a ballot measure in November 2018 by a vast majority of Portlanders, and notably, we are the first climate fund measure created and led by communities of color in the U.S. That still remains the case today, and that was in a broad coalition with progressive businesses, environmental groups, labor, social service organizations, and so many others. PCEF is truly a gift to the city by the community. We are passed and funded by a 1% gross sales tax on Portland sales by corporations that make at least $1 billion nationally and $500,000 locally on the basis of their Portland sales, and we exclude a range of things such as basic groceries and goods, medicine, utilities, etc. And to date, we've awarded over 155 million in grant awards, although we're actively implementing a range of other projects. Now, this just is a quick slide that speaks to our guiding principles developed by the Portland Clean Energy Fund Committee. We are a program that is focused on climate action fundamentally with multiple benefits. We're justice-driven, community-powered, and accountable. We're going to reference our priority populations a handful of times here in this presentation. And so just to note this, PCEF focuses our investments in climate action by giving priority to people that have been historically under-resourced by sustainability, climate action, and clean energy programs. These groups are known as our priority populations and include, but are not limited to, people with low incomes, people of color, and people living with disabilities. And then for folks that have been tracking and paying attention and along the journey with us for the past few years, you'll know that we passed unanimously at City Council last September of 23 our climate investment plan. It's our inaugural climate investment plan that allocates $750 million in climate investments over the next 5 years. Now, that plan is important as you think about this application to be familiar with that plan and understand what is in there. But the plan includes allocations for 16 strategic programs, our tree maintenance reserve fund, and our community responsive grants program, which some of the folks here have participated in as recently as this past cycle. Now, that community responsive grant program issued RFP number 3 this past winter, and that closed in February a couple months ago, and we are currently under application review for that. So just for folks to know, we're actively working on that application cycle as well. All right, with that, I'm going to pivot over and speak to this current funding opportunity, collaborating for climate action. Now, what we're going to talk about here in this section is the intent of the funding opportunity, why it came into being, how much is available, what projects are eligible, who can apply, and broadly our timeline before we pivot to our question and answer session. Now, before I jump into this, what I did just speak to is our climate investment plan. As we talk about this collaborating for climate action funding opportunity, it's important for folks to know as we work through this cycle, which we'll describe in a little bit, it will ultimately be incorporated into our climate investment plan. We will amend our climate investment plan so that the allocations we make as part of this funding opportunity will be captured there. And I'll speak to why that is here in the next slide. So the collaborating for climate action funding opportunity was approved by the PCEF committee just last month, with the intent to fund high-impact multi-stakeholder projects creating equitable climate solutions over the next 5 years. This funding opportunity came into fruition because the program was receiving and projected to receive substantially additional and greater revenues than originally projected when we developed our climate investment plan. So in order to account and address for some of those additional funds, the PCEF committee designed this process. I will note that this builds on recommendations that the PCEF committee did make as part of efforts to support some existing mutually aligned efforts within the city. So that there was other recommendations made in early February, and so this funding opportunity is intended to build on to that. And so the aim here with this funding opportunity is that it should complement the climate investment plan, the city's climate emergency work plan, and ultimately create opportunity for large, transformative, and collaborative projects. This funding opportunity will be allocated differently from our prior funding opportunities in that we will use a 2-step process with a letter of interest first, which is going to be a lower bar, lower effort, and then selecting a subset of those and inviting a pool of applicants to submit full applications. All right. And then maybe just to reiterate, at the end of the cycle, when the committee makes the recommendations and ultimately City Council takes actions on approving, adopting, or making alternative recommendations, those will ultimately be amended and included in the climate investment plan. So the climate investment plan is the document that speaks to the entirety of our investments over the course of these 5 years. So funding and eligible projects. The total awards anticipated in this funding opportunity is a little bit over $150 million. We expect funding requests will need to be between 20 and 100 million per application. So notable in this is that this is larger than what we've done in the past. So this should capture some of those larger scale projects. The projects must be wrapped up by 2029. The projects must result in meaningful reduction or sequestration of greenhouse gases, except in the cases involving the development of a workforce or contractor pool focused on climate action. And then projects with a physical footprint that are doing physical improvements must be located within the city of Portland. And we can get into this is a little different, obviously, with transportation projects. And then our eligible funding areas are energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, transportation decarbonization projects, workforce and contractor development projects, regenerative agriculture, and green infrastructure. Okay, next slide here. In terms of just the basics of who can apply. So the primary applicant must be a nonprofit organization or a government entity, and the applicant must have either co-applicants or demonstrate support from a community coalition. So that is an ORM, demonstrates broad support from a community coalition. Now, an organization or a subdivision of government may apply once as the primary applicant, so no more than once. But they can be, organizations can be partners on many applications. So you can show up in many places, but as the lead, an organization can only apply once. Public or government entities will include local governments, public school districts, transit agencies, redevelopment agencies, federally recognized tribes, and or port authorities. And as part of each application, there has to be at least one nonprofit community-based organization with a minimum of 8 years experience in conducting community engagement within the city focused on PCEF priority populations. And all of this information, I should acknowledge, is also on our website that folks have hopefully used to navigate here. But just a quick sense on the timeline. This opened up just a little over a week ago on April 4th. Now, letters of interest will be due May 17th, so just a little bit over a month from now. We will do a fairly short time frame of review with staff and the PCEF committee to review those letters of interest. And we will invite a subset of those applications back to submit full applications. And then by September 2024, we're tasked with making a recommendation to City Council. So the PCEF committee is specifically tasked with making a funding recommendation to City Council, which they will then entertain. So that's what we're that is what we're marching towards, folks. All right. So next set of slides, and we'll jump to Q&A after this, is just going to talk about some of the required elements of the letters of interest and then some guidance. And that guidance relates to just some information on the review criteria. So letters of interest should be a PDF and include the following information. List of your application partners, a description of the approach to and or the structure of your partnership with your co-applicants. An example is that a response may include a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, between the partners and or coalition members to describe how they work together, how they're making decisions together in their collaboration. The LOI should describe the proposed project with enough detail that we understand what we're contributing to. It should provide the estimated total budget request amount, as well as information about other project funding sources, if any. So we need to understand, is PCEF the sole funding source? Are there other funding sources? If there are other funding sources, have they been already committed? What is the likelihood of receiving those funding sources? As well as include an estimate of the minimum funding required to ensure the project's viability, as well as the maximum amount of funding that can be effectively utilized within the project. So we know that some projects will have a range where there may be the ideal, this is the full build out, but we could also implement a project at this level, but we're going to submit right here. That's going to be helpful for us to have that information as we ultimately need to structure a package to invite back for full proposals. And not every project will have that. Some will not. Some will be, this is the exact number and this is what we need. And if we don't get this project doesn't move forward. That is equally helpful to understand and know as part of the submission. As part of the LOI, we also need an estimated project timeline, a description of the implementation team and the relevant experience. Obviously, as well, just an articulation, an explanation of how the project clearly reduces or sequesters greenhouse gases. Now, this isn't needed for workforce or contractor development. Obviously, we want to know what the training is focused on and the credentialing or other things there, but we're not asking for folks to do the calculations themselves. We need to understand what is the pathway and mechanism for reducing emissions. What are the units of things that are going to be installed, the widgets, et cetera, so we can do our evaluation there. We'd like to understand any co-benefits associated with the project beyond the emissions reductions or sequestration. We'd like to understand the community outreach and engagement that has taken place to date regarding the project. We know this is going to be a short time frame to bring together letters of interest, but we know that for many of the ideas, folks have been thinking, chewing on, working on these ideas for many years in some instances within the community. It's helpful to have that context. And then we'd like to understand with some specificity, what are the projected benefits to PCEF priority populations, as that is a target audience for us.
Hey, Sam, there's a request for you to slow down a little bit if you could.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. All right. And so because I'm not going to go back and read these things again, these are recorded, but I will slow myself down moving forward. All right. And so the letters of interest, how will they be evaluated? We'll evaluate them really around 5 criteria. One will be the viability of the proposal. Does it have, if there is additional funding that's required for the project to be completed, what is the likelihood that that additional funding is going to come together? Do we have funding commitments made? If a project is proposing to do work on a certain parcel of land or a certain geographic area, what is the control that the applicants have on that parcel of land, that building, that area? Those are the sorts of questions we're going to evaluate when we look at the viability of the proposal so that we can ensure we understand its path to completion by 2029. So big element is just what is the viability of the proposal here? What are the projected greenhouse gas emissions reductions or sequestration? So we need enough information so we understand the things that are going to happen in the project. Is there going to be a field where you are going to tear out pavement and install native vegetation, trees, and other things? What is the acreage of that? Are we targeting certain buildings and what are the square footage of those buildings broadly? And are we replacing HVAC systems? Are we doing insulation in the walls? Like, what are the things we're going to do at a high level so that we can back in and get some ballpark estimates around the greenhouse gas emissions reductions associated with the project or the sequestration? We're going to want to know information on, again, the projected benefits, and we'll evaluate those projected benefits, co-benefits, beneficiaries, with a particular focus and elevating and putting priority in our evaluation on benefits to PCEF priority populations. Another area we will evaluate is just the diversity of the coalition and the strength of the public-private partnerships. In this proposals, demonstrating significant engagement with at least one public partner will be given preference. So proposals collaborating with a government entity, a school district, a port authority, a redevelopment agency will be given priority. And we want to understand the strength of those collaborations. In large part, this is that we want to see relationships where there's good dynamics of power sharing. And then we want to understand the community engagement. So obviously we will be evaluating the letters of interest based on the community engagement that they're referencing, that they've done as part of getting to their project concept, as well as the community engagement that they may do in the proposal itself. All right. Now, uses of funds, allowable expenses, and those with some limitations. As should be expected, allowable expenses, the top line are going to be obviously the various materials, supplies, and equipment purchases that are going to be necessary to implement a PCEF eligible project. In this, as folks that have engaged with our community responsive grants know, we do not require lowest cost budgeting. As well, funds can be used for expenses associated with maintaining an investment over its lifetime. This may involve prepayment of a service warranty, a maintenance contract, or other thing that is necessary to ensure the durability of our greenhouse gas reductions or our sequestration investments. Project reporting. We require a lot of information to ensure that we are getting the community benefits that we state we expect to get. So we want to make sure that folks are appropriately accounting for and capturing the and budgeting for the project reporting expenses, whether that's staff time or platforms that are intended to be used. As well, lastly, is just the personal expense. personnel expense. This is the direct staff time that's used to implement a project. Additional allowable expenses, but with some specific limitations, are first, indirect costs. These are allowable. Sometimes this is considered overhead. They're allowed up to 15% of the project budget, unless the primary applicant has a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement with a federal agency that they can submit as part of the proposal. Building improvements in that sector, about up to 30% of a total construction project could be used on each project to address life, health, safety, and accessibility or seismic issues. So this is separate from the energy efficiency investments. Up to 30% of the construction budget can be used for life, health, safety, and accessibility or seismic issues. For sites that are committing to providing shelter or community resilience functions during extreme weather, that threshold goes up to 40% of the total construction budget can be used in those manners. And then lastly, for net zero or high performance building projects, for projects that are aimed at getting to net zero, up to 25% of the total project costs can be covered, including land acquisition and design. And instead of taking a measure by measure approach, where in other projects we're going to pay for the individual measures, here we would look at a holistic building, since that's whole building design concepts. And then for projects that go to the higher threshold, that commit to getting to the U.S. Green Building Council's Living Buildings Challenge or equivalent criteria, they can request up to 50% of funding for the total project costs. And then just wage requirements, folks should know that all of our projects require folks to be paid the PCEF minimum wage, which is 180% of minimum wage. So that needs to be accounted for in the budgeting. And as of this year, that'll be about $27.81. Our funding cannot be used as a basis for rent increases. And then this is a really critical one that I'm going to emphasize. Prior to the disbursement of any allocated funds, the project must have an executed community benefits plan, a community benefits agreement, or a community workforce agreement with input from co-applicants and community coalition partners. Now, this is something that we understood we could not expect to be completed before the application is submitted, but this is an area that we would look at in terms of viability. Are the core elements of a proposal there that we know they can get to completing a community benefits plan, agreement, or workforce agreement? And so on our website, there are resources that point to examples of what this looks like as part of a project. With that, I know that this was a little quick. I think we want to spend the vast majority of our time, we're getting just about to that point, on questions and answers. And so what we will do at this point is we'll stop recording. Folks will have an opportunity to go back to YouTube and listen to anything I just shared. And we're going to pivot into a Q&A session and just fire off on a first come, first served basis.